I looked out this morning and the sun was gone. I turned on some music to start my day. I lost myself in a familiar song and I closed my eyes and then I slipped away. It was more than a feeling. When I hear that old song they used to play, more than a feeling. I begin dreaming, more than a feeling, till I see Marianne walk away. I see my Marianne walking away. Now, you're all looking at me going, why is he talking about Marianne? Why is he speaking in weird sort of poem things? Well, I've titled today's sermon, More Than a Feeling. More than a feeling because experiencing God is a lot more than just feeling something. And we get given this book. We get given this book, and all throughout the words of this book, we get a picture of the character of God. And it starts at the very start of time, at creation, and it works its all the way through. And we get confusing pictures of God in the book of Revelation. And today I want to talk about not just the knowledge of God, not just the feeling of God, but the experience of God. Hence, it's more than a feeling. The story's told of a guy who was humbly flying his little Cessna plane in the airs above North Carolina. And he was cruising along and he radios through to the tower and says, "Shh, tower," or wherever it was, can you please give me my land speed? I want to know how fast I'm going. I'm setting records in my little Cessna. And the tower comes back in their sort of monotone voice, and they say to him, "Mate, whatever his call sign was, little Cessna, you're doing about 90 knots, which roughly calculated is about 166 kilometres per hour." And he's sitting at his controls and he's cruising along, and when he's sitting there, he's feeling as though he's not travelling 166 kilometres per hour. But then all of a sudden he hears something else on the radio. And this other pilot comes in and says, "Hi, call sign, don't know, but I'm flying a F-18 Hornet thing. Can you please give me my land speed?" The tower jumps on in the Houston, I don't know, I kind of picture it as the NASA sort of Houston, we have a problem voice. Just sort of that nasal sort of, "Yes, you are doing." Anyway. But the F-18 was doing roughly around 620 knots, which is roughly calculated as 1,148 kilometres per hour. He was moving. And I'm sensing that they could actually feel the speed that they were doing. And I'm sure that he was up there, and it's sort of like a brag moment. You know, he's up there, he's absolutely cruising along. Old mate's just doing 166 kilometres per hour. This bloke's doing over 1,000 kilometres per hour. And it's sort of like a, hey, look at me. And then a voice comes on the radio. A voice comes on the radio and says, "North Carolina Tower, can you please give us our land speed?" And the tower comes back. And the tower comes back and says, "Well, if you're going to flex, you might as well flex well, because 3,411 kilometres per hour, Mark III, fastest plane ever built." Fastest plane ever built. The SR-71 Blackbird has featured in quite a few movies as well. It's so futuristic, but it was built a fairly long time ago. And the interesting thing was that when this story happened, the pilots were on a training mission. The pilots were on a training mission, and they'd only flown together a few times. And I can't remember the name of the guy actually piloting the plane, but I can remember the name of the communications officer in the back. His name was Walt. And the pilot himself was going, I don't know if I can work with Walt. I don't know how you can be thinking about this, going 3,411 kilometres per hour. But anyway, he was just thinking to himself, I don't know if I can work with Walt. I don't know if he's the guy for me. I don't know if I can fully trust him as my communications and navigation. And he was having this debate in his head whether we actually can work together. And he's there, and he hears this communication from the Cessna first of all. And he's like, oh, that's nice, 166 kilometres per hour. That's just a Sunday drive on the Maroondah Highway. And there he was. He thought, oh, that's nice. We know where we are. Everything happens so fast in this plane. And then all of a sudden he heard the F-18. And the communication between the F-18 and the tower. And he thought to himself, that's interesting. The F-18 guy, typical sort of Air Force guy, wanting to get one up on the civilian plane. And he wrote down in this little article, he said this, he said, I was about to hit my radio button to ask for my land speed. But I heard the microphone engage 2 seconds before I did, and it was Walt communicating with the tower. And it was at that point, that experience, that moment, that I knew that I could work with Walt because we had the same sense of humour. The SR-71 was actually, there's no bombs or guns or anything like that on the plane itself. It was actually designed to spy. It can travel so fast, it can do from Western Australia to Brisbane in under an hour. Crazy speeds. And the funny thing was, it is so engineered, and for those of you that have heard me speak before, I talk about Formula One, and I talk about engineering, and I talk about all kinds of different things just because I love stuff that goes fast. And this particular plane, the SR-71, it was built out of titanium. And when it was built, they had to build it with expansion gaps in it. And so when it is sitting on the runway, its fuel is actually leaking onto the runway until it can take off and the gaps expand enough so it seals properly. And it can hit Mach 3. Fastest plane ever built. If there was ever a speed experience that these two pilots would have felt, it was this training mission across America. Amazing bit of machinery. But the thing was, they can stare at their instruments, they can get a picture of what's going on, they need to fully trust those instruments, because when a feeling kicks in, sometimes that feeling can lead them astray. They have to fully trust their instruments. Fully trust their instruments. Throughout the New Testament, we've got the Greek scholars that are arguing all the time, and they find themselves defining things, and they're on the pursuit of knowledge. And so quite often, when we talk about God and we talk about His experience and we talk about all kinds of different things in the New Testament, we have the Greek people that are actually talking about it as head knowledge of God. Whereas I like to look at it from the Hebrew point of view. Because if you go into the Old Testament, we have the same sort of descriptive words of who God was and what He did for the people of Israel. And we find that the Hebrew words are about experience rather than about God. About experience rather than the head knowledge. And I guess you can find that in the stories of the Old Testament of Israel walking through the wilderness. They had a pillar of fire by night. They had a pillar of smoke by day so they could experience God on a daily basis. They could experience God on a daily basis. I love fire. That's another love of mine. I love fire, and it stems from growing up as a kid and going camping and building small fires to start with, and then they get bigger and bigger. But I was on a particular Pathfinder camp out, and we're up in the hinterland of the Sunshine Coast in Queensland, and at a place called Kenilworth. And in Kenilworth, they've got national parks and things, and so we had a group camped over here because you couldn't camp as a big group. And so we had a group camped over here, another group over here, another group over here. And we had to fend for ourselves, which is always dangerous when you've got a bunch of teenagers and 10-year-olds and all of that, fending for yourselves. Our counsellors bought us a fruit box, and they filled it with all our food for the weekend. And so we then had to cook on these fires. We had to make up the stew recipes, which was amazing. Amazing. I don't know if orange peel should always go into a stew, but it adds a bit of roughage. I don't know. But there we were. We're at Kenilworth National Park, and we decided we were going to build a fire. And we had our junior counsellors around us because we were the older group of the Pathfinder Club, and so we didn't need as much supervision. And so we had the junior counsellors around us, and we decided that we needed to experience full-on camping. We needed to experience the survivor style of camping. We'd watched too much Bear Grylls. Because we were in the bush looking for all kinds of stuff to cook. We were looking for all kinds of stuff to burn. We were doing all kinds of different things. And we decided we weren't even going to put up tents. We were just going to camp beside the fire. And so there we were. And we reached a point where we were self-sufficient enough. We were experiencing the wild of the Sunshine Coast. It sounds better when you just say experiencing the wild. And we'll camp beside the fires. We survived the weekend, obviously. And when it came to pack up, this is when it becomes dangerous. Because when we come to pack up, everything sort of, if you can pick it up, it can burn. And so we were deciding, okay, here's a bit of cardboard, right? Oh, that's the box. We got to take our rubbish with you. But if we burn the box, then we don't have to take the box out. Makes sense, yeah? And so we burnt the box, and then we, walked around the campsite a bit more and found a bit more paper and stuff. Probably the notes that were meant to be taken for some honor or something like that. And we burnt that as well. And then as we're continuing to walk around, we're slowly opening our bags going, I wonder what we can burn. And all kinds of different stuff was coming out. I had an old cricket bat. I didn't burn the cricket bat. It's all right. I had an old cricket bat, but instead of having the rubber grip on it, I'd taped it up. I taped it up because that's what you do. And as I looked at the cricket bat, I thought, that tape's coming off. I could burn that. And so I started unrolling the tape. And I was doing it beside the fire, and as I'm unrolling the tape, I'm letting it drop into the fire. And it's just like coming off the roll itself. It was just one big strip. And funnily enough, as I'm doing it, I'm enjoying the process and whatever else. But one thing I didn't notice was simply that the tape was acting like a wick. And as the fire's starting to come up the tape towards my hands, I thought, that's getting a bit warm. And as the fire's come closer to my hands, I've gone, oh no, what do I do now? Probably a little bit quicker than that, but there I was, and I'm standing there as a teenager going, oh no, what do I do now? And I thought the first thing that came into my head, and I don't know why my body reacted this way, but the first thing that came into my head is, if I flick it, the air will make it go out. And so I flicked it. I cracked it like a whip, and a little bit of flaming tape launched itself into the air. And when I take chapels for the school kids, I talk about slow motion. The world goes into slow motion, and this is one of those moments. And here it is, and it's sort of looking like a falling leaf. And as it comes down, it was electrical tape for those playing at home. As it comes down, it lands on the back of my neck. It lands on the back of my neck, and it slowly continues to smoulder. And then all of a sudden my brain went, oh no. What am I going to do? And so the next thing I thought of, being in Queensland, the next thing I thought of was, I've got to get to a tap. I've got to get to a tap, and I've got to get this thing out on the back of my head. And there's we were away from the adults, as I said earlier, and so I quickly ran to a tap, turned the tap on, and put this smouldering bit of tape out on the back of my head, full head under. It was great. The Pathfinder director comes for a walk. And as they're walking around, they see my head absolutely drenched. I had a bit more hair back then, so it was probably a bit more obvious. And my head was absolutely drenched, and he comes around and goes, Simo, what have you been up to? Nothing. I haven't done anything. I just was hot. It's Queensland. Either that or I was working hard and I'm sweating. Either way. And I managed to get away with it. But my neck was sore. My neck was sore. And eventually we got home to my home and about to do some stuff for the afternoon. And I had one of my singlet on. It was probably a Parramatta Eels singlet or something like that. And my mum, who's a nurse, saw the back of my neck. And she asked, what's going on? And she comes over for a closer look, and then all of a sudden, you know something's bad. You know something's bad when Mum calls for Dad. And Mum called for Dad, and Dad comes, and he's a pediatric nurse. Worked in emergency and all that kind of, seen all kinds of things, which we heard about at the dinner table every night. It was great. But then Dad came along and he saw it and said, yeah, we've got to go. On the back of my neck, the plastic had melted and it had turned into something about this long. This massive big burn line. And I can't remember what degree burn they said it was, but it went down a few different layers. And it was definitely a little bit painful. But I was big and tough. You see, from that experience, I've never put tape in the fire again. But from that experience as well, I've learned a whole heap of different things. You see, the simple thing was that it's put a bookmark, and I've taken sermons here before about bookmarks. It's put a bookmark in my life about that exact moment. I can tell you what it smelt like. I can tell you what the weather was like. I can tell you all kinds of details. Who was there? Who was laughing at me? Who was having a good time? Who was not having a good time? The little 10-year-old down the road that was crying. I can tell you everything about that experience because of the experience. Because of what happened and what I had experienced. We're going to jump into the Bible. I'm going to skip Bear Grylls, but we're going to jump into the Bible, and we're going to have a look at a story that is an interesting one because it's something that we don't often think about, and it's in the book of Genesis, and it's Genesis chapter 22 and verses 1 to 18. And if you're using one of those green Bibles in the back of the seats, it's page 17. See what I did there, Lani? Thank you. And it's page 17 for those of you using the little green Bibles. And it's about Abraham and his son. 17, 8 to 15. And it says this. Let me just find it myself. Thank you. Page 17. A little bit different. That's all right. Starting in verse 8, and it says, "The whole land of Canaan where you reside as a foreigner, I'll give you as an everlasting possession to you and your descendants after you, and I will be their God." Then God said to Abraham. So Abraham's received this promise that he's going to have descendants. They're going to, what's the word? That are going to fill the earth like the stars in the sky or the sands on the beach. And as they're reading through, sorry, I'm just reading ahead to see if I've actually got the right one. No, I don't. That's all right. Oh, I don't have the right one. I'm looking at the wrong thing. I got 17 mixed up. 22. Here we go. Sometime, verses 8. Abraham answered, "God himself will provide a lamb burnt offering," and the two of them went together. So, a little bit of backstory. Here we go. little bit of backstory. So Abraham's going to have this massive multitude that is born under him, and Abraham and Sarah are going to be the parents of that nation. And they finally had a son, and there's a whole thing that starts off with all that thing. But they finally had a son, and I'll give you the summarized version. And when they had the son, God comes to Abraham and says, I'm going to test you a little bit. Abraham didn't quite know it. But then God says to Abraham, I want you to take your son Isaac, your one and only son Isaac, and I want you to sacrifice him on a mountain that I'll tell you a bit later on. That's nuts. That's nuts. To take God to come down to Abraham and say to Abraham, I want you to take your one and only son. And the Bible's very careful, I believe, the author's very careful in writing that one and only son in the mix, because later on in the New Testament we have that connection of God had his one and only son, John 3:16. And Abraham does it. Abraham turns around and I can't even imagine what Sarah was thinking at this point. And Abraham gets Isaac and they go for a walk, and they get a couple of servants to carry the wood to start with, and they take a walk out to the bottom of a mountain. And as they're there at the bottom of the mountain, Abraham says to the servants and to Isaac, righto, we're going to leave these guys here. I'll put the wood on your shoulders, to Isaac, and then we're going to go for a walk up this hill. And up the hill they went, and they went up there, and they found all the rocks and things, and they built themselves an altar. And then surely Isaac by this point is going, wait a minute, something's wrong. Wait a minute, something's wrong. And they put the wood on top of on the altar, and Isaac then the scriptures tell us that Isaac was then bound and then placed on top of the altar. Surely by that point Isaac's going, wait a minute. And there he is on top of the altar, and it gets quite descriptive in the sense that Abraham takes the knife and he lifts it up like this, and just before he's about to plunge it down, the guy must have had some serious strength, because he's just about to plunge it down, and an angel of the Lord appears to Abraham and says, do not hurt the boy. Do not hurt the boy. You have shown yourself worthy. The Lord will provide. And then, as you look further forward into the text, we find that a ram is caught in a thicket next to where they are. And they're able to use the ram for the sacrifice. The Lord will provide. There's an experience there that I'm tipping that Abraham and Sarah never forgot. There's an experience there that I'm tipping Isaac never forgot. To have your dad about to plunge a knife. But then the Lord will provide. I tell you, that is an experience that gives us a picture of God in that situation. The Lord will provide. Jehovah Jireh. Jehovah Jireh. The Lord will provide. This is a picture of the Old Testament that we're starting to get. We've got God as a provider. It's an experience that Abraham and Isaac had. We've got God as a provider. There's experiences that I'm tipping that if you look back on your life, you can see God as a provider. Moses, and we're getting short on time, so I'll just keep moving along. But we've got a story of Moses, and as usual, the Israelites are about to do battle with another country, another people, and they're there, and they this one's on page 62 of your green Bibles, Exodus chapter 17, 8 to 15. And they're about to do battle. But the weird thing was, Moses wasn't going to lead them into battle. The next leader of the Israelites was going to lead them into battle. It was Joshua. And Joshua was going to lead them into battle. But the thing was, Moses had to do something that was very important to this occasion. Moses had to hold up the rod of God, which is an interesting thing to start with, because at the very beginning of Moses' story, we have an experience with Moses and Moses' rod, Moses' staff. You see, Moses was a shepherd, so therefore his staff was his identity. It was one of his most important tools when moving sheep around and things like that. So when God talked to Moses, which we talk about in a minute, when God talked to Moses about his stick, it was more than just the stick he was talking about. And when he said, throw it onto the ground, and when Moses threw it on the ground, it became a snake. and then Moses picked it up again, it was sort of like God saying, hey Moses, whatever you've got going on in your life, whatever you've got going in your life, bring it to my feet, throw it down at my feet, and then pick it up, because I can turn what is your identity into something that's amazing. I can turn you into the ultimate leader of the Israelite people, the superstar of the Old Testament. And the definition of the rod changed. And in this particular story, that staff is called the rod of God. And Moses' job for the battle was to hold the stick up, to hold the rod up. And every time that Moses held the rod up, the Israelite army would be more prominent in the battle. And I don't know if Moses had a bit of sense of humor or whatever else, but he says every time he brought it down, the Israelites would lose ground in the battle. So I don't know if he was sitting there doing these ones. I don't know. Lucky I wasn't Moses. But it got to the point where Moses was holding the rod above his head that Aaron and another helper, they actually came and helped Moses. They helped Moses hold the rod above his head, and the Israelites became victorious in the battle because of the process that he went through. You see, Moses wasn't just experiencing what was going on and experiencing the power of God for himself when the Israelites were moving forward in the battlefield. You see, it was a shared experience with people that were alongside him. It was a shared experience with the people that were with him. We have a God that can be described as a banner. Moses holding up the banner. Banners in those days were very important, especially when it came to battle, because the armies would have a bannerman go before them. They would have a bannerman to go before them to show the people that they were about to fight how powerful the army was, who owned the army, what area they lived in, and who had control over them, and all that kind, how rich they were. All this information was from a simple banner. And so there, in this picture, we've got Moses holding up the rod as God's banner. And God is given the picture of being the Almighty God, because as Moses is holding up God's banner, the Israelites made ground. And they won. They won the battle. The last, and we'll finish up talking about this one, but the last story that I quickly want to go over with you this morning is found in the book of Exodus again, but it's earlier, and it's the burning bush. So when I talked about Moses dropping his stick down and turning into a snake, that's what it's all about. And I'll read this one with you, and it says, "Now Moses was tending his flock," well, the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, "and he led the flock to the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him, and flames from a fire from within a bush. Moses saw that the bush was on fire, but it didn't burn up. So Moses thought, I'll go over and see what's going on." Hey, you're seeing this fire and it's not burning what it's burning, but yeah, okay, I'm going to go have a look. Righto. And then when the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from inside the bush, "Moses, Moses." And Moses said, "Here am I." "Don't come any closer," God said. "Take off your sandals, for the place that you are standing is holy ground." Then he said, "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob." And at this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. The Lord said, "I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt, and I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned for their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of the land into good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey." I don't know about you guys, but a land flowing with milk and honey sounds a bit sticky. Anyway. "The home of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, Jebusites, all of the above. And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I have seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now go, I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt." But Moses said to God, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt. And God said, I will be with you. And this will be the sign to you that it is I who have sent you. And when he brought the people out when you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain. Moses said to God, I suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me. And they'll ask, what's his name? Then what shall I tell them? And God said to Moses, underline, highlight, all that kind of stuff. I am who I am. It is the weirdest answer in the Old Testament. I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites. The I am has sent me to you. I am who I am. And it's an interesting sort of concept. And as I continue to think about this over my time, over sitting in lectures, supposed to be thinking about other things and all that kind of stuff. Wendy, don't tell the Theo lecturers. Thanks. And I thought about it a bit more. And the best thing that I came up with was this. I am who I am is simply saying I am who the Israelites need me to be. And if you put it in your personal context, I am who I am is this. I am who Simon needs me to be. I am who you, sitting in your seat today, I am who you need me to be. There's probably some deep, real theological explanation to this that links all the way through to Numbers 24 or something like that. But when it comes down to it, it becomes an experience that you can experience with God because we've got a God that wants to be sitting right next to you. He wants to be carrying you through whatever you're going through. It's an experience like no other. And it's got to be more than a feeling. It's got to be more than just an idea. It's got to be more than just knowing. It's got to be all these kinds of different things that comes down to an experience that God wants to experience with you. Not for you. Not beside you, whatever. He wants to experience it with you. And He is, I am who you need me to be. The great I am is quite often referred to. I am the great I am. We sing about it in different songs and everything, but the cool thing is we've got God that gave us a picture and experience, and I'll invite the band up. We've got God that has given us the picture of who He is through the knowledge and the words in the Bible. And we come to the conclusion that He is almighty and all-powerful, but the best thing is that we can call Him Father. The best thing is we can call Him Father. We can call Him Saviour. That deserves to be more than a feeling.